This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you by BitRefill. BitRefill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. Visit bitrefill.com for more information. Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. My guest today is James Nuveen. He's an internet entrepreneur from the US who has been living in Colombia, in Medellin. We actually met in person back in March, like 6 months ago. And so he's well overdue for a podcast appearance. Well known on Twitter, lots of overlap in terms of our Twitter followers. So James, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Vance. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So James, they're not going to be able to hear you because it's only in my headphones, but I have a Twitter Spaces going with some people in there. And if Twitter Spaces wants to say hello, say what's up before we terminate the Twitter Spaces, guys, you're going to be on the recording of the James Nuveen episode. Roger, say what's up. Captcha, say what's up.
Hey, James, big fan of you, man. I've been following you for a good while. It's good. You were an inspiration for me to, decide to make the jump and move to South America myself. So I appreciate your content and what you do, man.
Oh, man. I love that Southern accent. That's awesome.
Yeah. Cool, guys. Well, I'm going to terminate the spaces there so I can proceed with the podcast. I will do more Twitter Spaces in the future. Boom. Okay. James, it's just you and me now.
Cool, Vance. I'm ready.
Cool. Well, that was a little social proof for you. You know, you're inspiring people.
Yeah. That makes me feel good.
Yeah.
For sure.
So you're in Medellin right now?
I am. As you know, just bought a home here in Medellin, and have spent off and on about the last 2 years here and just fallen in love with the city.
Good. By the way, you don't have to be that close to the mic.
Okay, I'll back up a little bit.
All good. So yeah, as I mentioned, we met back in March, April. I did a little meetup in Medellin, but we didn't get a chance to chat that much. So this is a podcast that I've been looking forward to, so that we can finally learn more about James. Even though on Twitter you're one of the most out there guys in terms of telling people the specifics of your story, even where you've lived in the States, how long you've been in Colombia, posting selfies, all that type of stuff. So I always respected your approach, and I'm sure your followers feel like they know you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I guess it's a pretty different approach than the one that a lot of people take on social media, where they prefer to be anonymous. I took the very opposite approach and try to be as public as possible, but obviously that has its pros and cons. As I'm starting to get a little bit more attention than I did over the last few months, I take security a little bit more seriously. So I'll continue to tell my story the way it is. I'll continue to be myself and post all these selfies, but definitely considering privacy and security a lot more than I used to.
Yeah, where are you at with that? What's the trade-off or the pros and cons?
In terms of like audience growth and the entrepreneurial side of just building an audience, I think it's really beneficial to be yourself. I think that's what people really connect with. And I think that's one of the reasons that I've kind of grown as fast as I have. But obviously that has its downsides. When you go viral for all the wrong reasons and you get a lot of people in your DMs threatening you and in the comments and quote tweet threatening you, that authenticity is not the best trait to have. So just with a more public profile, I'm thinking about being a little bit more private and secure about my life and the current events of my life.
Right. Have you been getting hate mail and stuff, like Gringo Go Home type stuff, or?
Yeah, well, it just comes with the territory. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Like for example, about a week ago, actually maybe a couple days ago, I was here in Colombia in the migration office, and I tweeted about my experience, just a long form tweet about just the bureaucracy that you would experience in any country, not necessarily specific to Colombia, just telling my experience in that office and how it took a little bit longer than I would expect. And for some reason, things like that blow up. Just a personal experience. I'm not saying that it's always this way. I'm not saying that it's endemic in this country versus Ecuador versus Costa Rica. And yeah, for some reason, people want to threaten me over a simple story.
Crazy. I actually don't get that much. I think it only really happens when something really goes viral with
Hmm.
with the purple hair crowd, but other than that, like on an average week, I really receive like almost nothing.
Yeah, for the people that do react that way, there's a very common thread in their political beliefs, in their lifestyle. They're keyboard warriors, and they're nothing but that. So I don't pay them too much attention. I just worry about security going forward, in case those tweets get a lot more attention than I would like them to.
So is James Nuveen your real name?
It is.
There you go. My man is putting himself out there. So James Nuveen, um, I'll read your one of your most recent tweets, if you're all right with that. So it said June 21st, quit my 9 to 5 job with zero plans. July 21st, started an agency and hit 100K a month in 45 days. God damn, that's pretty fast. November 21st, moved to Colombia on a one-way ticket and met my girlfriend. April 22nd, hit six figures in the business. Nice. July to December 22, adventured to a new territory: Peru, Costa Rica, Panama, Ecuador. February 23, reduced effective tax rate to 12%. Nice. March 23, launched Freedom Files to document my journey and help others live a freer life. June 23, launched my first international property. July 23, became fluent in Spanish. I'm glad you could pinpoint a month. It's definitely a moving target for me. um,
Hmm.
September 23, got my Colombia visa on way to permanent residency, etc. I'm the happiest, healthiest, and freest I've ever been.
Yeah, and just one little correction: I did not hit 100,000 a month in 45 days. That would be ludicrous. That was just 10K a month, so a relatively much more doable um, goal. So that in just those
Oh,
45 days of
did I say 100? I thought I said 10.
you said
Okay.
100,000, and that would be the dream. But
No,
yeah,
still
just in the
10,
45 days.
k new, brand new business, and you hit 10K within 45 days. If you told someone that, they'd be like, nah. You know what I mean?
Yep, exactly. And I got a few comments like that. Like, what are the chances that this actually happened? Well, all of it actually happened. That was a pretty true, I mean, it was 100% true chronicle of my last 2 years. And the reason why I started the Freedom Files a few months ago. I want to help people get out of that rut that a lot of people are in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So you must have started that like just shortly before we met up.
Yeah, that was like February or March of 2023. Hmm.
Okay, so you think the meetup was first, and then I inspired you. I'm going to take credit.
You definitely did inspire me. There was a lot of time before I started going public about my story, where I was lurking on Twitter. So if you look at my Twitter, it'll say that I started my account a lot earlier than I started tweeting and started growing the audience.
Hmm.
Um, but people like Eddie Kwan, who are on the entrepreneurial side, but also
Hmm.
live in Latin America, Lawrence King,
Hmm.
same thing, Dylan Madden, those guys, and of course you fans of My Latin Life, those are all inspiring accounts, both on the entrepreneurial side of things and the global mobility, location independence side. Um, And I don't think I would be here if it weren't for you four.
That's awesome. I guess since we're talking about Twitter, yeah, I mean, who else? Like, who are some of your favorite Twitter accounts?
That's a good question. Certainly yours. I'm a big fan of a few other Anon Latin America accounts like Medellin Unmapped, which is a lot more close to me as a fan of Medellin and the Paisa life, Antioquia, and Colombia as a whole,
Mhm.
bow tied Colombia. And I've got a chance to meet both those guys up in person, and incredible guys, very ambitious. So I'm cheering them on as well. Um, let's see some other great accounts. The Jers Way.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know how public he is with his name, so I'll keep that in my Rolodex. But the Way of Jers is a fantastic account. Bowtied Mara, all these guys who talk about entrepreneurship and making money and location independence. That's what freedom is all about. So that's what interests me. Another one I would throw in there is IMI Daily. Um,
Mhm.
Christian, who you've interviewed, actually
Mhm.
is a incredible, well traveled, speaks like 8 different languages, has a lot of different passports and residencies. He's someone definitely to look up to, especially if you want more information on residencies, passports, that kind of stuff.
Yep, Christian's a good guy. And so, what advice or inspiration would you have for other people that are maybe a year, year and a half behind your journey? Maybe they're listening to this, they're lurking on Twitter, they're interested in international lifestyle, and they're thinking, should I be more? Should I be more? Should I put myself out there? Basically,
I think so. I think so. Really the metric to know whether you can grow an audience online, and in my business, I help people do this. So I help people grow audiences with content marketing. And the people who are really successful at it are interesting people. If you don't consider yourself interesting, if you're not doing interesting stuff on a daily or weekly basis, then growing an audience can be a little bit more difficult. You have to be producing really valuable content, really helpful content. But if you want people to follow you and your story and your authentic self, then I think being really interesting is the key trait that you must have to do that. Um, and yeah, I think publishing my work online has absolutely changed my life.
I agree with that because if you didn't put yourself out there, we wouldn't be recording a podcast. You know what I mean? And I really, the amount of people that I've met, you mentioned Lawrence King. I met up with him in person a week ago here in Paraguay, and that never would have happened if I wasn't putting myself out there, at least semi anonymously. You know what I mean? And so I think at very least, it gives you an excuse that when you reach out to people, like they already know who you are, or they know that at least you have something going on, and you're not just like a fanboy or something.
Exactly. Yeah, it certainly gives you credibility and authority to speak on whatever you're speaking on. Yeah.
Right. And you can build together, like there's something to do.
Yeah. The doors have just opened up. Um, Obviously, with what I've been doing over the last 2 years, learning a language, that opened a whole lot of doors for me. Um, Starting to write online, that opened a whole lot of doors for me because I was able to connect with people all over the world, no matter what language I was speaking.
Hmm.
And for some reason, people look up to me. As I get a few posts and comments and DMs every once in a while of people who been really inspired by my story, and I'm so glad that has happened. I don't think of my story as that inspiring, but if it helps people, that's what I'm really here for. If it helps them quit their job, if it helps them start their business, if it helps them see more of the world and learn new languages and appreciate more cultures and meet the wife of their dreams and build the family of their dreams and the place that makes them happiest. Those are the things that really make me happy.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very tough to capture the essence of Latin America on Twitter or with
Mhm.
kind of the written word and stuff. And it's tough to just be like, it's better. You feel more alive, and it's tough to explain to someone back home like how it's different, how the I don't know how like families are different and going out is different and at least in our opinion, better or more fun. I mean, you must have some buddies back from the U.S. cheering you on. How do you kind of relate to them now?
Oh, that's a good question. I keep in contact with most of the people who mattered a lot to me from the U.S., whether they're friends from college or where I was working before I came to Latin America. The people who were really important to me, and obviously among them is my family. I'm very close with my family. Um, I keep in very, very close touch with them, and a lot of them have visited me and see they've seen how happy I am here, which makes them happy. Um, Obviously, my network has grown a lot being down here, and you wouldn't think it would because I'm working remotely, but because of Twitter and because of the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Medellin, which is booming, both Colombians and expats and nomads. Uh, my entrepreneurial community and my network has just expanded exponentially, and that added with the community that I had before, the friends and family I had before, they just make me so happy.
Hmm. Yeah, and you're from kind of like Midwest or a mix of a bunch of flyover states, right? It's like Ohio, Wisconsin, Indiana.
Yeah, and the weirdest one of them all is the one I've spent the most time in, and that's North Dakota. So I believe you're from Canada, and North Dakota is pretty much an annexed province of Canada. Um, but yeah, that's where I grew up.
That's cool. And so, especially for someone from North Dakota, Columbia must seem like a long way.
Definitely. Yeah, this whole experience seems very foreign to a lot of my North Dakotan friends. But the most recent spots where I spent a lot of time were Indiana and Ohio. Still a little foreign, but less so. And a lot of those friends have visited me down here.
Oh, that's good.
So, yeah.
And what's it like when someone comes to visit you? Like, walk me through that experience.
Well, it depends where I am. I do enjoy, since I do live here in Medellin, Colombia. This is my favorite spot to bring people because it's a glimpse into my new life. However, I've met up with people in Cartagena and Quito, Ecuador, Cali, Colombia, several different places. The Amazon, which was an amazing experience. Cotopaxi in Ecuador. Um, I've been traveling by myself for the last 2 years until I kind of settled here in Medellin. Very different when you bring like your hometown friends or your your college friends here, because to them, this is a very different experience. If you're living in hostels all over Latin America and traveling with experienced backpackers or experienced travelers, those people are very comforted by that experience. For someone coming from Wall Street who works in finance and wears a suit all day, you get to see them in a whole different light. And that's one reason I really, really like bringing my friends from the United States to Latin America.
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you by Language Blend, the new best way to learn Spanish. Language Blend focuses on what you actually need to live and get by abroad with daily one-on-one lessons, a dedicated texting partner. It's like living in a Spanish-speaking country without ever leaving home. Go to languageblend.com for more information. Yeah. Yeah. Tell me more about this in detail. I always think it's funny because it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work to host someone that's not not a traveler because they just have so many questions, and you really need to kind of guide them every step of the way.
Yeah. Well, let's go with like the most recent example of my friends visiting me. We went to the first they visited me here in Medellin, and obviously I can show them a awesome time here because I know the spots, I know the people, I know the local culture. However, we went to Cali, Colombia, which I where I had never been, and that was an absolute blast. We were just walking down streets, and we would witness a salsa party in an alley, and we would join. We would be warmly accepted by the caleñas, and we'd be up until 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. just dancing salsa. No alcohol needed, no drugs needed, nothing. And those guys, for them from New York or from uh, Chicago, that experience is so unlike anything they've ever experienced. Um, and then after Cali, we went to Quito and we summited a big volcano near Quito. We went to Cotopaxi where we rode horses in the valley, and that was just an unforgettable experience. And then after that, we went to the Amazon where we stayed in a hostel and we went to a local zoo where they had Amazonian local animals. Local isn't the right word. Native animals who I had never seen before. I've never seen a lot of these animals. And we went to a medicinal plant farm, which was across the river from where that zoo was. Like these experiences, they've never been published about. Nobody's ever taken photos of them. These local Ecuadorians create these amazing experiences, but they're not trying to. It's just because they're so foreign to us that if you're curious and open to them, they can just blow your mind. Um, so with a bunch of guys from like inner city United States, like New York and Chicago, that experience is just mind blowing and opens their mind to a whole lot of other possibilities, and that is a really really cool experience to bring your friends along with.
Hmm. How do you think, James, about location independence versus the opportunities that you might have had in the US to work on Wall Street, work in Chicago, work in San Francisco, and you've obviously chosen a different path. You mentioned before that you had a 9 to 5, and I think you're, doing pretty well for a guy your age, but you weren't fulfilled. Maybe you could kind of walk us through that hero's journey and the opportunity set that was presented to you and how you kind of took a different path.
Hmm. I appreciate you phrasing that as the hero's journey. And I know what that's from as a marketer, online marketer. I know what that's from, but I wouldn't yet call myself a hero. So that's funny. But yeah, man. So I've always been entrepreneurial. I launched a couple of businesses, like very mini projects, I would call them, in college, and was accepted to this entrepreneurial development program in Indianapolis before coming to Latin America. And in that fellowship program, I also had a job at a consulting company. And uh, after that, it was a 2 year program, and I could either accept a job elsewhere. I could go elsewhere. I could quit my job and build my own thing, or I could accept a promotion with my current company. And I got about a 40% raise. I wasn't making that much before, but 40%, that was huge. That was huge for me. A big opportunity. But I had always been entrepreneurial, and I thought, "Ugh, this is such a good opportunity to kind of recalibrate where my life is going." So I quit. I turned down that promotion. I didn't look for other jobs, and I quit and started my own business the next day. I had no idea what that looked like. I didn't know how to make money online. But once I got that first check in the mail, funny enough, um, it changed my whole mindset. I changed from a very scarcity mindset where I didn't think it was possible to make money online to one of abundance where so many people need help. If you can just help them solve their problems. For me, it was building websites and helping them publish content and grow their audience. If you can help them with those problems, then you can make money online. And then your world opens up. It doesn't matter where you work from. or what device you're using or who you meet or where you work. All these kinds of things don't matter, just as long as you have Wi-Fi and a device to connect to that Wi-Fi. You can help a lot of people.
Mm.
And one thing that actually I should mention during this whole process was the catalyst was writing my own obituary.
Oh
And
shit.
that might shock people as kind of a turning point. But in January of 21, I wrote my own obituary. And what that looks like is you pick an age where you think you're going to die, and you work backwards from there. What do you want to accomplish by the time you die? Who do you want to be surrounded by the time you die? What kind of assets do you want to leave to your children if you have any, or your spouse if you have one? What kind of legacy do you want to create? All these kinds of things that I would never consider if I weren't writing my own obituary. And I wrote that, and it was a pretty profound experience. I realized a lot of things that I didn't think about on a daily basis. I knew that I was entrepreneurial. I knew that I wanted to start a business someday, but someday wasn't enough. I wanted to do it now, and I wanted to explore the world. I hadn't done that. I didn't study abroad during college. I didn't get time after college to do that. So I said, why not now? So that quitting my job in June of 21, um, I give thanks to writing my own obituary. And then a few months later, I came down here to Latin America, where I thought it would just be a 3-month trip, but has turned into a 2-year adventure. And I don't see myself going back anytime soon.
Where did you get that idea to write the obituary? Is it a? It sounds like a Tony Robbins thing or something.
Very similar. Donald Miller is a famous marketer, and he's written many books. Um, and he has a course and a book called Hero on a Mission. And that course took me through the process of writing my own obituary. And I have to give thanks to him, because that was a tremendous, tremendous experience. And I recommend that to anyone. It sounds morbid, like I said. Like, why would I write my own obituary? But it is a really, really um, introspective exercise.
And
And
did
I
you
would
not
recommend that to
like what
anyone.
you wrote, or
I absolutely loved it. But the thing was, the life that I was living in that moment wasn't the life that I had written on my obituary. So obviously things had to change, right?
okay? So you
So
wrote a fanciful obituary, like, and yeah, like you said, it, it was obvious that you needed to make a change. What did you
yep, and
write? What
then
did you write?
I can actually pull it up. It's quite personal, but I've shared it online before, so why not do it again? Um, yeah, I can walk through this like step by step.
See, because I
So
thought it was gonna be like too boring, and you're gonna be like, you know what, like we got to do more here.
no,
Yours was actually like a sick obituary, but you just weren't on the path to get there. But yeah, sorry, go ahead, hit us with it.
yeah. So here it is. And this is quite embarrassing for me sharing this again publicly, but whatever. So James Hill Nuveen died peacefully in his mountain home in Montana yesterday afternoon, surrounded by his wife and 2 children. He was 95 years old. In his eyes, Nuveen lived a life of ultimate freedom and adventure. In fact, he dedicated almost his entire adult life to helping others achieve their own personal versions of freedom. At the age of 24, he quit his corporate job to start his own digital marketing agency. He worked with hundreds of people to help them think differently about marketing and to help them connect with their audience. And he scaled his services revenue to more than 500,000 before shifting focus. Then Nuveen helped young entrepreneurs and freedom seekers dedicate he created content for young entrepreneurs and freedom seekers to achieve their personal versions of freedom faster and easier. He also helped young entrepreneurs achieve their. Oh, I just said that. He was a proponent of the flag planting theory and spent a considerable amount of his life in Latin America, where he met his wife and raised his children. The Nuveens also traveled between the Rockies, Colombia, Eastern Europe, and the Caribbean. He was a vocal proponent of homeschooling on their homestead in Colombia, taught his children how to view life, nature, and their role in it. The family owned cattle and other animals as well. A specimen by health standards, Nuveen kept a steady diet of outdoor activities even until his elder years, hiking, kayaking, skiing, biking, running, swimming at every opportunity he had. Nuveen is survived by his two children and his wife. So you can tell that that 9 to 5 career that I was living at that time that I wrote that obituary did not match where I was wanting to go. So 6 months later, I decided to quit when that program ended and completely just shattered what I thought the trajectory of my life was going. And 2 years later, I'm actually living a lot of those things that I wrote. I have not edited that since January of 21. It might seem like I have because a lot of them have come true, but that's just me living out a lot of the goals that I set for myself 2 years ago.
Hmm. So you had visualized the whole digital marketing agency before putting it together.
Essentially, yeah. I don't like to talk about manifesting because I think that's a bunch of woo woo. However, I worked backwards from that obituary and said, all right, in 20 years, in 10 years, in 5 years, in 1 year, what do I need to be doing at each of these stages of life to get to where I want to be when I die, when I am at that 95 years old age that I think I'm going to die at. So it was a matter of really just working backwards from that obituary and setting up goals for myself that I could actually achieve. Not like fantastical. The obituary seems fantastical, but when you break it down, when you put it into like yearly goals, that's when it becomes a lot easier to understand and actually achieve.
Hmm. Have you ever actually read the obituary section of a newspaper?
Yeah, sure. A long time ago, I haven't seen a newspaper in a very long time. I'm sure mine is much longer than the average one, but it's kind of the exercise. You want to get as much out on paper as you can.
Hmm. Because I find they probably spend a lot less time on the specifics of the business, but it's more just like
Hmm.
where did you live, how many kids do you have, um, and kind of
But
like go
but
ahead.
Vance, you also want your obituary to be like awesome to read,
Right, right.
right? At least I want mine to be entertaining and fun to read because I that's what I want my life to be. I want it to be fun. I want it to be entertaining. I want it to be action packed. I want it to be adventurous. Um, so that's kind of the obituary in
Mhm.
action.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of biographies and autobiographies. So the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, autobiography of Andrew Carnegie.
Hmm.
Those who else? What's his name? Henry Ford, or no? Who am I thinking of? Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller.
Hmm. Hmm.
Those were the big three that had a really, really big impact on me because they were autobiographies, and it was them sort of talking about their own life, but in a lot of detail. And I can't even remember things that happened, 8 months ago, and they were they were writing about their whole hero's journey, their whole come
Hmm.
up, and they were sort
So
of writing in a way where they were trying to set a good example for their kids and so forth.
yeah. So Vance, I have a question for you. If I'm allowed to ask you a
Not
question on this
allowed. No, it's
podcast.
fine. Yeah, what's up?
So you and I take very different approaches when it comes to traveling. Obviously, in Latin America, where I like to spend a lot of time in each place, spending 2, 3 months maybe in each city before moving on to the next.
Hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you take a much faster approach to travel, and you've been all over Latin America, but you spend a lot less time than 2 or 3 months in each location. Am I right?
Um, I do think that 1 month minimum is what I recommend to people. for a lot of reasons. You know, you get a discount on Airbnb. You can get a 1 month
Hmm.
gym pass. You can get to know a city very well. You know, I've only spent 1 month in Buenos Aires, but I feel like I know the city quite well from having spent a month there. You know, you're
Hmm.
working during the week, you're doing mini adventures during the week, and then on the weekends you can do those day trips where you really need a day. You know, whether it be go to, you know, like a museum or like whatever it is, right? So I think 1 month is a good minimum, and anything less than that ends up being very expensive and in some ways pointless because you didn't fully exhaust where you were before, right? If that makes sense. And so I think you really kind of need like a month to exhaust. You know, to answer your question more directly, I actually do return to the same places quite frequently. Like I've been to
Okay.
Paraguay like 4 times, and spent, you know, multiple months here. So I am continuing to double down on places, but there is there's something to be said for going to an unknown land for the first time, and it's something that just gets you really excited. You know, you could have a super long flight, maybe you had a layover, 24 hours, and then you get to the new city and you just have a new energy and you don't even want to go to sleep. And going to a new city brings me a lot of energy, and I'm good about routines and, you know, making sure I'm productive. And so I don't think I think I'm actually more productive in a new city than I am when I'm home or when I'm somewhere comfortable, because the opportunity cost of my time is higher. And I'm like, I need to get this done so that I can like go out and explore and do something cool and do something new. But if you're, you know, let's just say back home in Indiana or whatever, you're not going to aggressively finish the task as soon as possible, because when you finish work, there's nothing to do except like watch Netflix or like maybe go for a bike ride that you know, somewhere you've already ridden your bike a million times, right? So I think that going to a new place, if you're disciplined, can actually even make you more productive, on top of the benefits of, you know, just like getting to know the world better.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take. For some reason, I thought that you traveled a little bit faster than 1 month in every location, but I 100% agree. Where 1 month, 2 months is kind of the sweet spot. Where first, yeah, you get discounts on Airbnb, and you can sign up for a monthly gym pass and not waste half of it if you're just going to spend 2 weeks there. But also getting to know the local culture, getting to know the local food, the cuisine,
Hmm.
um, getting to know a bartender at your favorite bar. That those are the real experiences that I've found are um, the real treasures that I didn't really experience in the United States just living in one location. When you bop around to multiple different places, those are the experiences, to your point, that just made me feel so grateful, feel so alive. Um, to use your word, alive is a good place to be.
Yeah, the blood is just flowing different when you're in a new place, I think. There are some places that aren't worth a month. You know what I mean? Like I recently spent a month in Sicily, but I did like, you know, a week in four different spots because I
Hmm.
like traveling on the weekends, so that I'm not like super stressed about upcoming phone calls, and I have that. You know, it's just better to travel on the weekends for a lot of reasons. And so instead of doing, say, 1 month in Palermo, Italy, I did, you know, a week in Catania, and then a week in Palermo, and then a week in Taormina, and so forth. And it was fast, though. It's fast because it's a lot of time spent looking for the perfect hotel. I'm really into logistics and ensuring that I'm staying in the perfect place. Like I'm literally mad at myself if I pick a less than optimal hotel or
Hmm.
Airbnb. So I spend a lot of time like researching, like, is this perfect? Like, what exact block do I want to be on? What exact side of the street do I want to be on? Right, and that stuff can just take a lot of time. Um, but Yeah, so it's definitely exhausting to travel fast. So I think 1 month is good, and then some people say like 3 months, and I just feel like that's too long. You know what I mean? Because there's no longer a sense of urgency. Obviously, basing up somewhere like you have and buying in a condo and all that, I think there's value to that as well. But I think the like 2, 3, 6 months stuff is like in some ways like a little, I don't know. It's not my preferred style because you lose a bit of that sense of urgency, and you just, um, I don't know, you just don't see as much in general.
Yep. I completely agree with that sense of urgency, motivating you to get out and see a lot more and experience the city.
Yeah, I was just talking to OG Vance here in Paraguay. You're probably aware that there's an OG Vance that started the blog way back in the day. We had some cigars last night, and he was telling me that he still hasn't been to Foz de Iguazu. Like, like the world, it's like seven wonders of the world. Like one of arguably the most famous site in all of Latin America or all of South America, probably top five for sure. Crazy waterfall, guys. Definitely put it on your to do list. And he hasn't been yet. And
Yeah.
he's been here for a long time. Let's say that.
Yeah, that's what happens.
And I'm like,
That's what happens when
how?
you live.
How? You know what I mean? There are people who are from New York who've never been up the Empire State Building, right?
Hmm.
It's because they don't have that sense of urgency to do it. They're like, oh, I'll go eventually, like on my birthday or something. And it just never ends up happening.
Exactly.
But yeah, we'll go back to you. So I tweeted out about an hour ago that I was recording a podcast for you, and some questions came in. And so we'll start with my favorite one, which actually came from Medellin Unmapped. So shout out to Medellin Unmapped. But he said, ask James to describe life outside the gringo bubble and how different it is. Of course, in a Medellin context. It's like, what's the difference between gringo Medellin and um, locals Medellin?
Oh, I don't even know where to get started on this, but the difference is pretty stark. So I've probably spent a collective, I don't know, a year and a half here in Medellin in the last 2 years. And in that time, I've only spent about a month living in El Poblado, which is the center of all touristic and expat and
Hmm.
gringo culture. It's
Hmm.
where the most expensive restaurants are, the most expensive bars, the best nightlife, the best restaurants as well, the best food and drinks, best hotels, best Airbnbs. But once you get outside of that little district, that neighborhood, and really it's just a few streets, it's a few blocks because El Poblado is the biggest comuna in Medellin. Um, Once you get outside of that barrio, it's way different. It's way different. I'm elsewhere in Medellin. I won't get too specific about my location, and I absolutely love waking up and walking outside and hearing the parrots on my doorstep
Hmm.
and not seeing gringos every day. But I can choose to have that experience and choose to meet up with expats and choose to meet up with friends who live in El Poblado when I want to. So it's kind of the best of both worlds where I am, um, where I can dip into and out of the gringo culture where I have a lot more business opportunities and the more local culture where I feel alive, I feel happier, I feel energized, I feel welcomed, I feel warm. The people here are just so amorous and so friendly. And when you can speak their language, which I can, they give you a whole lot more respect than what I see in Poblao, where nobody speaks. Well, I won't say that. 95% of tourists do not speak Spanish. and they treat you as such. They treat you as a tourist. Here in my barrio, I don't get that same treatment. So the lunches are about $2. The drinks next to the campesinos who come in riding on their horses. Um, it's just a completely different experience and something that makes me smile. I don't know if you can hear the smile on my face, but I just love life here, and it would be quite different if I spent all of that time surrounded by people I see in the United States or in North America. Um, so that gives you a little taste of how life is different here in another part of Medellin that is not El Poblado.
Hey guys, quick interruption to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill is the best way to convert your crypto into gift card balances. These are gift cards that you can spend at hotels.com, Airbnb, Nike, and many more. You may remember Joel Valenzuela, previous podcast guest. He's been living on crypto exclusively since 2015, and he's a big consumer of BitRefill. And so I asked Joel, I said, what do you like most about BitRefill? He said that he likes the instant delivery, the precise amount so that you don't have to juggle a lot of gift cards, and he loves the global selection. Nobody else has this much selection of gift cards, over 10,000 gift card options across hundreds of countries. Go to bitrefill.com to sign up, and you can also use the code MyLatinLife for 10% back off your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. Mm-hmm. And I assume your girlfriend's done a good job of getting you to understand the culture on a deeper level.
Yeah, and the reason that I'm fluent is her. She is learning English, and so I had to learn Spanish to be able to communicate with her. And she's the reason I became conversational in about, I would say, 6 or so months, and then fluent at about a year 2 months, because I was speaking with her every day. And if I were out of the country, I was speaking with her on the phone. Um, so she's definitely the reason that I am fluent in Spanish. And yes, she, as a Colombian, has shown me her life, and that's kind of what I came here for. Obviously, I love taking part of the more luxurious part of Medellin, which is El Poblado, and going out there is a blast. But also going to where she's from and going to her family's finca on the weekends, which is like a house in the mountains of Antioquia, the department of Medellin. That is the real experience that makes me feel um, fulfilled.
Mm. And I imagine you're continuing to peel back the layers and learn more about Colombian culture and Antiochian culture.
Yeah, and there's a reason I'm still here. I came here when I was just going on a mini trip, a 3 month trip. I came directly to Medellin. I didn't know anything about it. Met my girlfriend in the third week and decided to stay for 9 months. When I was supposed to the next week go to Costa Rica and Panama. So I canceled a few Airbnbs, lost some money, canceled some flights, lost some more money. But 2 years later, I can say that it was worth it. And after that, had spent time in Panama, Costa Rica, Ecuador, a lot of time in Ecuador. And if you haven't been to Ecuador, I highly recommend that country. It's a beautiful, beautiful country, beautiful culture. The nature is one of a kind. Been down to Argentina and Uruguay. So I've been all over the place, but there's a reason I invested here in Colombia and want to spend a lot of time here. And that is because the people, um, people make the place. And there's nowhere in Latin America that I'd rather be than here in Antioquia, here in Medellin, because the people are so amorous, they're so welcoming, they're so warm, they're so friendly, and they're so familial, which is something that I don't think a lot of Americans, a lot of North Americans experience. Um, so that really warmed my heart when I got here, and I just have not let that feeling go.
That's awesome. And do you think things have changed over time in terms of the sentiment towards foreigners and gringos, or do you think maybe once you leave Poblado, everything's pretty chill? Or yeah, I'm sure you have a pretty well developed thesis on this.
Yeah, I don't think about it too much because it doesn't affect me on a day to day basis. Like I said, there are a lot of keyboard warriors out there who like to think that this is life or death, and that uh, gringo investment and money coming into El Poblado and the city and the region and the country is a bad thing. Um, I can see that reasoning. The housing prices, for example, have just skyrocketed here. They're starting to level out a little bit more, and there is just a ridiculous supply of Airbnbs where there are so many empty ones because there are too many. There are too many because so many Colombians have rented them out to
Hmm.
Airbnb, and they're just not. There's not enough interest. And then obviously the I see the positives. All of this money coming in has provided the city with the biggest tourism numbers that they've ever seen, the most money coming into the city that the city's ever seen. Um, and that can't all be bad. Um, Obviously, investment in a city is super positive. As a capitalist, as a unapologetic capitalist that I am, um, that's undeniably good for a city. You want more interest in your city. You want more visitors. You want more capital. You want more economic activity. And that's the positive side. So I see both sides. I can see why some people are upset here. I have never experienced anything personally in my daily life from someone who's angry about that. But that also might be because I live outside of that bubble and I don't really see foreigners on a daily basis.
Mm.
Um, so I've got a little bit different perspective. Medellin Unmapped has an interesting perspective on this. As an expert in Medellin, he's a local paisa. Um, he would be a pretty interesting conversation to have on this podcast as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely want to ask you about the personal investment you made, and then a bunch of people had questions about visas. If you want to comment on that, but before we do, walk us through like how nice Colombian people are, and if I could add us, you know what I mean. I'm hitting you with the chest pack because I already know that they're very nice, but and if I had to add a second question to that, when you go back to the States and you compare the two in terms of just like the common courtesy and so forth, would love to kind of hear your thoughts on the thing.
Yeah, and I'll provide a anecdote, a real life example. One example of this, like default politeness here, the default um, politeness. I'll leave it at that. Is the metro here in Medellin? Medellin has a metro train, which is the only one here in Colombia, and I think Quito is going to get one soon, but pretty much the only one here in northern Latin America or northern South America. Actually, Caracas, I think, has one as well. But I have not made it over to Venezuela. Anyway, when you enter that metro, it is dead silent. You don't see the stuff in the metro that you do, for example, say in New York City, where there are people shooting up and people sleeping on the benches and taking up spots and just being public nuisances. You don't see stabbings on the metro. Um, you don't see that stuff. Here, everybody's silent. If they're listening to something, they're listening to it in their headphones. Um, and that's just one example of the politeness that you don't really experience in the United States. For some reason, it just has always been a very abrupt, rude experience when I'm dealing with those kind of public transportation um, uh, experiences in the United States. But I mean, everything feels like a familial experience. I'll also say that when I arrived here 2 years ago, I got really close with the family who owned my Airbnb, and to this day, I feel like a son of the mother as the matriarch of this family. And let's say every month we get together, and I'm also close with her son who's around my age, and I feel like they're an extension of my original family. And when my mom visited, she was so thankful to my, I'll call her my Colombian mother. um, I've just been so accepted, not only with that family but in my girlfriend's family. I feel like I'm just one of them, and that's something that can't be replaced when you're traveling all over the place, or hopping every week to a new location. I have been able to make these like really really deep relationships, and that's due in part to staying here long term. However, it's also due in part to how warm and welcoming and friendly the Colombian people are, specifically the paisas.
Hmm. Speaking of stories, do you have any go-to stories, or like what's the best story that you want to hit us with on the podcast? Doesn't have to be about like the what we've been talking about niceness, but do you have any like go-to stories in the bag that you want to hit us with? Total left field on the question, but I'm sure you got a bunch.
I'm sure I have a bunch. Yeah, and that's the problem. I'm trying to sift through my brain to figure out one single one that I can tell you. Um, let me keep thinking, and
Okay.
you can ask me
All right. I don't
a
want you
different
to
question.
escape from the podcast without like one good story. So, tell us about the investment. Tell us about the condo that you bought.
Yeah, so I've got my story. We can come back to that in a second. But on the condo side of things, I wanted to stay here in Colombia long term, and I didn't want to do that through marriage because I wasn't quite ready for that with my girlfriend. Um, and I wanted a route to permanent residency and citizenship, because I think if you're going to invest in time in a country, if you're going to invest dollars as well, why not get something out of it that's more than just your time there and the experience that you're going to have? So definitely went away from the digital nomad visa option and to the house investment option, which requires about it's about 80,000 US dollars minimum. That's the threshold to invest in order to get permanent residency in 5 years and citizenship in 10 years. Um, so I went that route and got an apartment here in Medellin, and just moved in a couple weeks ago. But that process, man, that was a long one. It was quite the ordeal dealing with realtors and lawyers and the uh, immigration department. All these kinds of different things coming together is kind of a recipe for disaster. I'm lucky that things worked out really well for me, and I got like the maximum time on my visa, which is great. Um, but there were certainly their fair share of setbacks in that process.
Like what?
Well, was working with a realtor who didn't really help, and charged ridiculous prices when I ended up signing a deal with him. I lost out on the first house that I wanted to buy because the realtor uh, went out underneath me. I don't know what the phrase is there, but went behind my back and sold it to someone else while I was gathering all my documents and stuff. Um, I finally found a great lawyer who helped me with all of these processes, and that's what I would recommend. If you can centralize your real estate process and the immigration process to one lawyer and have him do or her do all of that kind of stuff, that's what I would certainly recommend.
Hmm. And you bought it pre-construction or was already done?
It was pre-construction. Well, I wouldn't say pre-construction. It was during construction, and they had not sold all of the units. So I was lucky enough to find it, and it wasn't published anywhere on the internet, which is a really good thing because there would have been a lot more interest. Um, and yep, just moved in a couple weeks ago. I reserved it back in June. So now we're here in October, and I'm about a month in to living here.
Cool. And when you moved in, was it absolutely perfect, or I imagine there was maybe some flaws in the construction, and you might have had to go back to the builder and say, "Hey, can you fix a couple things?" Or
Yeah, they're here about almost every day,
wow,
fixing things that we find, and they're also still here in the building. They have not finished all the units. They were lucky to finish mine first, and I've been here for a month now while they're constructing other apartments in my building, which you can probably assume has a bit of a noise problem. So I'm surprised you can't hear any of the drilling while I'm speaking, but yeah, they're here fixing things pretty regularly.
interesting. Yeah, one issue I had with the unit, a new unit I was dealing with was just like there were just paint droppings. What's it called? Paint droplets all over the floor.
Mm.
And I was like, "Yo, are you just gonna leave it like that?" And like they just leave it like that. All these little things, right? They expect you to come in and almost like hire your own private team or something.
Yeah, and for example, there was a hole between the sliding balcony door and the wall where I mean, animals could get through that hole. Uh, Rain could get through that hole. Air could get through that hole. And to me, that's like a no brainer. How can you not fix that before finishing the apartment? And so I had to kind of step up and say, all right, I have a list of things that I need to be fixed my way because other people were not going to complain because they have different standards. Um, and they were happy to finish everything. And I think that's because I paid in full before moving into my apartment. So there were things that I could request that other people could not request because they're on a mortgage, for example.
Mm.
So very very different scenarios.
Hey everybody, hey everybody. Quick break from the podcast to tell you about Language Blend, the best new way to learn Spanish. Language Blend was co-founded by Jake Nomada, friend of the podcast, decade of experience in Latin America, and Jake and his team, they put everything into this program that they wish they had in terms of how to level up quickly with your Spanish language skills. Because the faster that you can get conversationally fluent in Spanish, the better the experience that you're going to have in Latin America. So go to languageblend.com for more information. So was paying in full a good idea in the end? Because I feel like there's pros and cons to that. Because then you have no leverage over them to like withhold a payment if they screw up.
Yeah, really good point. What I was able to do was pay half of the investment upfront to reserve my spot, reserve my apartment, and then once they finished, once I moved in, I paid that second payment, and then I was able to apply for my visa because you can't apply for the visa unless you've paid in full for your apartment and
Oh, really?
fully own the apartment. So that's why my visa was a little bit delayed. However, I'm glad I went that route because I didn't want to incentivize them to finish too quickly.
Right. What about getting the title? Sometimes you're paid off, they let you move in, and they just don't have the titles from the notary yet, stuff like that.
Yeah, that took another month or so. So, as you can imagine, like exactly what you would imagine from a process like this, a very bureaucratic. I had to go to notaries and lawyers and the chancellery, or I don't know what it was called, the central bank. All of these different entities had to act together, and for that reason, a lot of these documents, a lot of this process was very delayed.
And there's two different visas depending on how much you invest, right? You kind of mentioned it, like it's like 80K ish gets you one type, but if you invest 140 or 160, whatever it is, then you can get a better visa with a faster path to PR, something like that.
So Colombia, the short answer is no. They got rid of that option. That was citizenship by investment here in Colombia, and that amount was about 160, 170,000 US dollars, one time payment, and you would get citizenship right away. They no longer offer that with the changes that they introduced about a year ago. They introduced the digital nomad visa and got rid of citizenship by investment. So if you're going to go the real estate investment route here in Colombia, you got to make it at least 80-ish thousand US dollars, depending on the conversion rate at the time, and you have to pay in full in order to then apply for the visa. And that's a temporary residence visa for 5 years, and then you can get permanent residency, and you have to renew that visa up until those 5 years, and then you have permanent residency, and then after 10 whole years, 10 collective years, or 5 years after you have permanent residency, you can apply for citizenship. But all this timeline could possibly change for me in my case when you're talking about marriage. So that's certainly on the table.
Or kids. So the obituary
Okay.
said two kids. Are we still thinking two? Or are we trying to up that?
I don't have a specific number in mind. I just that was a obituary thing. And I'm only 26 years old, so I'm not trying to push the kids out anytime soon or rush anything that's not necessary. Um, but looking at that option for sure.
Looking at that option. Because Twitter says you got to have five, right?
Twitter says you got to have at least 5.
At
You
least
you
10, I
have to
think, on Twitter.
homestead. Yep, you have to homestead. You have to have cattle. You have to uh, have raw beef and raw kettle, raw milk and grass fed beef. All the things. Twitter is usually right.
Twitter's usually right. Good.
Oh, and Vance, back to the story. Well, I have so many that I could tell. But there's one that kind of sticks out in my mind, and it's I'll just tell about my whole experience in Cartagena, which is not a good one. Cartagena really rubbed me the wrong way, and you hear this a lot. Jake Nomad is a pretty vocal. I wouldn't say hater, but just it doesn't really appreciate the life in Cartagena.
Right.
And I didn't either. I was there for about 5 days. The humidity is ridiculous. It's on like Panama City's level, where if you step outside, you're automatically drenched in sweat. Doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter if you wear shorts or a shirt or a Speedo, doesn't matter. You're dripping sweat. Um, you get pretty much molested on the street by rappers and vendors constantly, and the gringo pricing is pretty out of control. This was earlier in my journey where I could not speak Spanish as well. We were on a boat and went to one of the islands. This one's called Baru, and paid for a platter of seafood. And I was with about 5 other guys, American guys who also didn't speak Spanish. And my mistake was not asking for the price beforehand, because once we finished up the seafood platter, which was really just a few patacon and some shrimp, um, and maybe some crawfish, and I think there was maybe a tiny bit of a lobster on there. They charged me about like $300. At the time, it was like $1,400,000 Colombian pesos, and that really taught me a lesson. But just my really overall experience in Cartagena was not a super positive one, um, and I'll leave it at that, because there were a lot of other things that rubbed me wrong. But like I say about every place in Latin America, if you're able to make a great experience out of it, all the power to you. But Cartagena is certainly not for me.
And so how would you have avoided that situation?
Always ask for prices up front. Always, always. If you don't see it on the menu, then ask for the price. Um, and speaking Spanish always helps. And now that I'm fluent, um, that's not a problem. And I'm usually with Colombians in scenarios like this, unless my friends from the United States are visiting, and that helps a lot too. If you're with a bunch of Americans with shorts on, with sandals on, you can expect to get gringo priced wherever you go.
And how much do they charge you for patacones?
It wasn't just plantain, but there was shrimp on there, maybe a little bit of lobster. It was about $300 total.
Holy crap! I had one like that in Mazatlan where I ordered something that was gonna be like it was kind of like it was like a surf and turf thing at a restaurant in Mazatlan, and the guy pretended to like not hear me or whatever, and then he went to someone I was with and was like, "Yeah, so we're gonna get this, right?" And then the person was like, "Bueno, I don't know," and then he just like went off, came back, and he ordered, and he the mesero gave us something that costed 10 times more
Oh,
than what
jeez.
I ordered. I was like, dude, what are you talking about? And he's like, I talked to your friend, and the friend said, bueno. I was like, you got to be kidding me! But I was the one that ordered. You know what I mean? Jesus Christ. So that's yeah. I mean, when you go to
It's
tourist
it's
places,
a
you really got to be on point.
it's a necessary experience though for beginners. Like I was saying, this was early in my Latin American experience, and I will never make that experience that mistake again. So I've learned my lesson.
It's almost unavoidable in a way. I mean, yeah, you got to ask for the price, but sometimes it's weird. Yeah, it's a weird one. That's a weird one. You got a couple others. You got to hit us with it. This you got to show out on your visit to the My Latin Life podcast.
I'm trying to think through all of these stories that I have.
A good hiking story.
There. Oh my. Yeah, I do have one. Hiking is one of my favorite things to do here in Latin America. The Andes are just a beautiful, beautiful spot. Um, but one really stands out in my mind, and that's Cerro Tusa here in Venecia, Antioquia, Colombia, which is about 3 or maybe 4 hours from from Medellin on bus. And I was going there with my girlfriend just for a little weekend trip. We were planning on staying the night in that little pueblo and returning the next day. And this story turns out a little bit sad at the end, but I'll get there at some point. We For some reason I didn't research this mountain, which is I always do. I thought it was more of a day hike than it was a grueling hike, and man, was I wrong. Um, so, if you don't know, Cerro Tusa is the world's tallest natural pyramid. So it's pretty much
Mm.
a exact replica of a Giza pyramid, but with trees all over it.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
obviously, it's a mountain. So if you look up Cerro Tusa, you'll know what I'm talking about. So we showed up at this mountain, and it looks impossibly steep, but not that tight, not that high, because it just didn't look that high. It was covered in trees. There was no like snow capping or anything, and we were just here in Antioquia. We weren't down in Chile or Argentina where those mountains are so high, and we thought it would just be a quick, easy 2 hour up and down, and we would get a good view. And with my girlfriend, we were not prepared for this. We didn't have hiking boots. We didn't bring food. We did not. I think we maybe brought one water bottle, no backpack or anything. And we were scaling up this mountain, hands and knees on the ground. So on all fours um, for 3 hours, going up this one side of the mountain. And we were seeing abuelos and abuelas, like retirees, going up and down. And we're thinking, how are they doing this? This is nearly impossible for us to do. And we're like 26 years old. So what's going on here? and it takes us 3 hours to get up. And we also showed up at 12 p.m., which, if you're a hiker, you know that if you're doing a 6 hour hike, showing up at 12 p.m. on the equator where the sun sets at 5:30, 6 p.m. is not a good idea. Um, the view was amazing at the top. However, so many bugs. So we were up there for maybe 5 minutes, took a few pictures, and there was a sign that said world's tallest pyramid, and headed right back down. And it ended up taking us about 6 hours, all in all. And by the time we got back down and got service again, I had realized that I had missed a bunch of calls from my mom, and that was not a good sign. And like I said, this turns out to be kind of a sad story at the end. After what was kind of a good day, it was a good day. It was just long and kind of treacherous, a lot steeper than we thought it would be. But my grandma was on her deathbed, and I had missed that throughout the whole day. So, uh, like I said, we ended up staying in that little pueblo that night and being comforted by the sounds of Paso Fino horses. I don't know if you know that unique step that's
Hmm.
here
Like
in
dancing
Medellin, where
horses.
exactly you hear that sound all night because the campesinos, which are like country people, bring their horses in and dance on the streets. So you hear that noise as you sleep throughout the night. Um, and that was pretty comforting because she was always a big nature woman, and her husband owned a ranch and had tons of cattle and rode horses for 40 years. Um, and I wouldn't say it's a crazy story, but it's a one that sticks out in my mind for sure.
Hmm. Wow. Would you recommend Cerro Tusa to people?
I would just prepare yourself. I was expecting a day hike, and it was a pretty treacherous one. And when I bring that up to friends here and Colombians here, they're like, "Oh my god, you did Cerro Tusa? That's a very very hard hike." And I think they're also converting it into an actual park now. Before it was just kind of the Wild West. You had to find your own path up. But now I think I believe they're converting it into a actual park with a path and maybe railings where it's really steep. But I wish I kind of had that when my girlfriend and I scaled it. That was the hardest hike I've done in Latin America. But
Well,
ill prepared, ill prepared.
yeah. Start the day early and have bug spray.
Exactly.
I got one from Medellin. You know Cerro Las Tres Cruces?
Yep.
So easy hike. You could anyone in Medellin could Uber to it, Uber to the base of it, do the hike. It's pretty easy up and down. Um, this was a while back, a couple of years ago. Very long story short. So uh, we start doing the hike. Big clouds start forming. We get to the top. Top's cool. Where clouds keep forming. We can't really tell if they're coming at us or they're going the other direction because it always kind of rains in Medellin, or like there's always kind of a cloud that looks like it's gonna rain. So it's hard to tell sometimes. Um, Basically starts raining big time. The hike. There's no stones on the path. Like it's just a
Hmm.
mud path. Um, it starts raining. The girl I was with started freaking out. She's like, "We're gonna slide down the hill." I'm like, "We gotta go now." I'm like, "We gotta go now. We gotta go now. Like it's gonna get worse." You know what I mean? And she's like, "Oh, I can't do it. I can't do it," and just basically freezes. And it just starts raining heavily, and the whole trail just gets washed out. And so I'm like, not even I can do this because you take one wrong slip and you're going to slide the whole way down. Like you could actually seriously get hurt. And so we stay at the top, or we kind of like sheltered under this thing, but it just kept raining and thundering. And we were just in shorts and a t-shirt. And I started getting like towards hypothermia. I don't know. It was so cold. And long story short, there's like you can go around the back path, and there's like kind of like a favela with like cows and stuff. We weren't even sure if you could even like exit that way, and we had to go all the way around the back of the mountain. We had to walk through this favela in the rain, and the Uber doesn't come, the cabs don't really come that high. They don't really go in these areas, and like eventually we like walked far enough down to where we started getting some cabs, but we got absolutely rained out on this mountain. Um, and so
Yeah,
yeah.
those torrential Colombian downpours are they'll get you. They'll get you. And I looked up recently where lightning is the most concentrated in the world, and the northern Andes, sure enough, are some of the most
Hmm.
concentrated lightning hotspots in the entire
Hmm.
world. I think Japan was like number 2 on the list,
Hmm.
but like the high Andes, Bogota, Medellin,
Isn't it Lake
um,
Maracaibo, like the Venezuelan lake right there? It's like
it might go up into Venezuela too. So
you know
yeah,
how there, you know
the
how there's
northern.
like the lake thing, like the like just over the border from Colombia into Venezuela is like it's not a lake. It's, I guess it's technically part of the ocean, but it's like the mouth. You know what I'm talking about?
Uh huh.
But apparently they have like these crazy thunderstorms over that lake.
Yeah, and I just looked up Lake Maracaibo lightning, and people actually call it Lightning Lake.
Yeah,
I did not know this, but that is fascinating. Wow.
yeah. Take a look at that. But yeah, so do not go for a hike if it's about to rain. Like you're better off not risking it because you might not be able to get down.
Yeah, and I know that hike well. It's a good little 45-minute quad burner for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's sick views. Anyone should do it that's listening to this. Um, yeah, so some people were asking your opinion to switch gears. Some people were asking your opinion on if they want to live in Colombia medium to longer term. What would you recommend? Would you recommend they go the path of investing in an apartment, or maybe get a digital nomad visa, or like what would your advice be to people?
I would never recommend that someone move somewhere without first testing it. So if you have never been to Bogota or Medellin, probably the two largest centers for investment here and tourism here in Colombia. Actually, Cartagena might be a little bit more popular than Bogota. But anyway, I would recommend that you first come here, test out life here, either for 6 months or a year, 2 years, and see whether you would like to invest in this country and see if you would like to live here full time. Um, there are really good ways to do that without uh, having to apply for a visa. Actually, that's not true. So, most Westerners, whether you're from Western Europe or Canada or the United States, you can come to Colombia for 6 months out of a year, which is a pretty generous uh,
Mm-hmm.
visa free access. So if you come here for 6 months and then get a student visa, which doesn't cost as much as a digital nomad visa, tax exempt, all these kind of things, um, you can then stay for a year. Um, and after that is done, you can stay for another 6 months because you still have the 6 months that you have after your student visa has expired. And that's already 2 years that you can spend here without getting a digital nomad visa or without having to invest in the country, without having to get married or anything like that. So
Smart,
there are lots of options.
smart,
But I would recommend doing that before deciding on a digital nomad visa or deciding on investing in the country like I have. And by the way, my investment, you don't have to necessarily invest in real estate or property. You can also invest in a business. And Colombian startups are some of the best in Latin America, the fastest growing, uh, one of the fastest growing startup ecosystems here in Bogota and Medellin. So um, there are lots of options, lots of options for sure.
yeah, that's a very good point that you made. The student visa or enrolling in a school, very. under publicized on Twitter and in sovereign circles in general. Your mileage may vary a little bit depending on the country in terms of how long you'll get the visa for, or if time spent on that visa counts towards citizenship. But in some countries, it definitely does, and in some countries, it's really the best way to go. And I think people don't popularize it enough or publicize it enough because it's like not really profitable for like a from an investment migration perspective, or it's not profitable for the lawyers, and so no one really talks about it. But low key, it should work, I imagine, in most countries in Latin America. You can enroll in like Spanish classes basically at a university, get a 1 year visa, 2 year visa. You can probably renew it or something, and it's low key one of the best ways to go.
Yeah, and it's a really good way to see whether you want to spend more time in a country, because sometimes just the 6 months that you get from Colombian migration visa free is not enough. If you want to explore more of the country, if you want to spend it in a different area, if you want to just extend your time, student visa is a good route. Yeah.
Hmm. And also, um, there's no need, not tax advice, but you can just basically cry that you're a poor student and you're not going to have to file tax returns probably. Whereas a lot of the digital nomad visas, they need to see how much money you're making. They need to authenticate that the money's real, and like all these extra steps, I feel. And then, of course, that's even more so the case under other visas. But if you're on a student visa, like that, they assume you're not working, right? And so it's very easy to just work online or whatever it is. Again, not tax advice, but you guys are here for the hacks, so there's one for you guys.
Agreed.
Cool. James, how do you want to get to wrapping up the episode?
Well, if I guess is are you asking where people can find me and that kind of stuff, or
Well, or just like a last little question or two. Dude, how is how is the name James working for you in Colombia? Do they understand what James is? Are they pronouncing it good? I'm just random question,
that's
but I'm
actually
just
a really really funny question, because my name in the United States is Jimmy. I go by Jimmy in the United States. But when I came here, and actually when I kind of started my business, I wanted a little bit more professional. But when I came here, I introduced myself as James, and
no.
that that was a very smart play, because obviously they have a very famous soccer player named James Rodriguez, who's kind of a washed up now, but very famous soccer player here. And I was able to say, "Sí, me llamo James, como el futbolista," and people understood that, and they laughed and they smiled, and that was a kind of a good in. So I don't go by James here; I go by James, but it's obviously spelled the same way.
And they literally pronounce it hummus? I think in Mexico they'll just say James.
They will, because there are a few Jameses here. Like John is a pretty popular name here as well. Usually, you would think people would say like Hon instead of John, or
John,
Juan,
John,
obviously.
John.
Yeah, exactly. So I get a mix of James and James. So, but I prefer James because it makes me feel a lot more Colombian.
Really? No mames, James.
Exacto.
I yeah, it might not work in Mexico. That would be too easy for that. Damn, I thought they would just say James. That's blowing my mind a little bit.
My girlfriend does. My girlfriend does, but most other people call me James.
Like her family and stuff, they say hummus.
Well, because she calls me James, her family calls me James. But people also like to call me Jaimito. Like
Jaimito.
Jaime is from
Jaime, yeah.
Jimmy,
Jaime is James, yeah.
um, and from Jaimito, people call me Mito. So in some circles, I'm just Mito, which is a far cry from Jimmy or James in the United States. People don't understand that when they come visit me, but it's funny.
Huh. So you didn't try to go for Jaime.
No, I didn't. I didn't like that as much as James. James is more dynamic. because I can switch back and forth from James to James, and it's spelled the same way.
Right. Right. Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, let's get to wrapping up and letting people know where they can find you.
All right, man. Well, thank you again for having me. This was a blast, Vance. You've been a big inspiration for me coming down here, and while I'm down here, being a great information source. So appreciate you bringing me on and allowing me to share my story. Yeah, so I am there on Twitter at James Nuveen, launching a YouTube channel in probably the coming week or two, to tell a lot of the same stories that I tell on Twitter and in the Freedom Files, which is my website where I document my journey to ultimate freedom through building a business, through quitting my job, through location independence and traveling all over the world. Heading to Europe in next week. So a lot of content coming from there. But yeah, I'm pretty excited for the YouTube channel. The newsletter is probably the best way you can find more information about me, though. freedomfiles.co.
Sweet. We'll have all that in the show notes, and hopefully we can put a link in there to the YouTube channel. So that's an additional oomph for you to get that going. That'll be a big game changer for you, I'm sure.
Love it.
Sweet. Well, this has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, my guest today, James Nuveen. Check him out, freedomfiles.co. Thanks again, James, for your time.
Appreciate you, Vance. We'll talk soon.